Okay, it's now up to you, Rogier.
Okay, thank you. So when we have a problem, we usually think about it that we usually think that we only have one strategy to deal with it. When we have a problem or a desire, we just think about solving the problem, satisfying our desire. But that doesn't always work. For example, Henry Ford once said that if he had asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse. So this illustrates that there's basically two ways to deal with a problem. You can either solve it, or you can redefine it, because that's basically what Henry Ford has done. What he did was to redefine the need for mobility in a new language, the language of the new industrial opportunities that arose in his century. So there's two different ways of dealing with the problem. Either you solve it, or you redefine it. Take, for example, traffic jams. You could either say that you need more traffic lanes and you could deploy autonomous vehicles, or you could say, well, why can't we get people to move closer together so they don't need to travel as much anymore as they do now? So when we have two strategies instead of one, the question becomes, well, when to choose what strategy? Well, there's been some research in that, in innovation studies, and it turns out that technological solutions are best for specific problems. But when you have to do with complicated problems, very complex problems, systemic problems, then it's better to choose the other way around, to try and reconsider what you actually need. And if we look at the problems that face us today, well, I'm afraid most of them are systemic. Like climate change, for example, or resource depletion, pollution of air, of oceans. These are all systemic problems. And basically that's what you get when you take your preferences as given and you only look for technological solutions. The problem with that is that our preferences are infinite. So what you're basically doing is we're applying this infinite model of growth to a finite planet. And it's bound to fail at some point. So what do we have to do? Look for technological solutions? No, we need to change people's preferences. We need to redefine them in the new era. And that's easier said than done, because if you want a technological fix, you can just wait for the engineers to solve it. But if you want to change people's preferences, you need revolution. You need to redefine people's preferences. People don't need, as Henry Ford has done, people don't need horses, they need mobility. They don't need pills, they need health. They don't need supermarkets, they just need nutrition. So I think actually this revolution is already happening. I'll tell you, so if you want a technological fix, I'll tell you what technology is going to change the world. It's not some new development in nanophysics. It's a technology that has been around for a couple of decades already, and that's digitization. I think that the digital revolution is going to change the world much in the same way as the industrial revolution has been doing in the last 250 years. I think it's not a matter of a couple of new business models, but it's going to change the society as we know it as a whole. And so let me give you a couple of examples of how this digital revolution is already transforming the way how we define our needs. The first wave in this digitization was the shift from hardware to software. Much of the devices you see here behind me used to be hardware, used to be material devices that you bought in a hardware store. Now they're just apps you download from an app store. But it's not limited to electronic gear. Take, for example, a car, a very material thing. 12% of the world's steel is used to produce these cars. What you need to consider here is that the value of a car is not limited to its materiality. It's not just the steel in the car that makes the car valuable, it's also the car being at a certain point at a certain time. And that's something you can get smart about. And that's already happening. That's what car sharing platforms are already doing. And if you know that cars are idle for 95% of the time, that means we can get by with 20 times less cars. So I'm talking about saving here, saving resources by sharing things, but it's even more than that. And that's something that has only been happening for the past couple of years, and I'm really getting interested in right now. It's peer production. So it's a whole new way of producing goods, not just of saving resources, but really producing something new in a way that is not mediated by markets or states. So we used to be able to produce in large quantities only if things were mediated by a price signal or by a hierarchical command. But what we see now, and Wikipedia is the prime example, is that this is a great tool that has been developed only with social cues. It's developed only through peer production, without the price signal and without a hierarchical command. So let's take this offline, and then what you have is something like this. This is BlaBlaCar. It's a car-sharing platform. It's an app where you can share rides with others. As you can see, this is real-time simulation of the actual BlaBlaCar rides that happened in Europe. As you can see, ride-sharing is especially popular between cities. So BlaBlaCar is effectively a competitor for railroads. What you see here is basically a parallel railroad infrastructure. And it was produced only with an app and a bit of confidence between people. So that it was produced without any steel. It was produced without any signposts, without any stations. You just need the app. So let me conclude here with the vision of growth that I think is symptomatic for the digital revolution. It's a growth in which we grow not by producing ever more, but by doing more with what we already have. So on technology, I would say it's not a matter of the technology we have, it's about what we do with it. I think it's a misunderstanding to think that our actions are limited by our technologies. Most technologies have been around for years or even decades before they really turn into a revolution. I think the only limit to our actions is our own imagination.
Thank you, Rogier.